This is a true story, and it haunts me every single night. It all started on a Tuesday night around 2:00 in the morning. I'm lying alone in bed in the dark, and my window is cracked open. I prefer having a breeze at night to stay cool. I open my window every single night. It doesn't matter if it's hot or cold, windy or rainy. I will open my window. Anyway, I had to make this post because it is really haunting me. To explain, all of a sudden, the noise started. I remember my eyes rapidly opening and the shivers coming down my spine. It was very paralyzing, and it made my whole body jolt like a shockwave running through my nerves. This sensation is especially intense at night when you are startled by a noise like your old house resting. But this was unlike anything I've ever experienced. To start, the noise that scared me seemed to be a man shouting from a quarter of a mile away. I thought to myself that this was extremely unusual. I live in a desolate area, and I don't have many neighbors around, so it couldn't have been them. I live in a wooded area in a humble neighborhood. Most people who live here are hermits and don't leave their homes unless it's for bi-weekly grocery shopping or leaving in the morning to go to work. But the screams were very specific and were arranged in a pattern. They almost sounded inhuman. A loud but faint yell would sound about every 2 seconds, and the yells were unintelligible words and lasted for about 1 or 2 syllables. It was almost perfect, sounding like a recording of shout played again and again and again. But for hours. The dreadful sounds stayed in place for 3 hours of non-stop yelling, and the man never seemed to move locations except for when the noises slowly got farther away, and that's when it seemed to stop. The sounds lasted from 2:00 a.m. to 5:00 a.m. I assume the man making the disturbance is in his early 30s. It haunts me to think of someone just standing in the forest blatantly yelling words for 3 hours straight in the middle of the night. The sounds didn't appear like they were desperate, as if they were in need of any help. The only drastic thing would be if a bear mauled you to death. But no one's stupid enough to go out at night like this. The shouts sounded emotionless, and of course, very terrifying. I was eventually able to catch my breath and peek out the window. It wasn't the wind causing the noise, and most definitely, it wasn't a branch scraping my window like someone would try to claim in order to debunk me, but I was too afraid to go outside and investigate. I had to debate whether calling the police would be the right thing to do or not. I kept my ear close to the window for a few minutes, and I was starting to decode what he was saying. It sounded like it was in a different language or a gibberish word being spoken, but it was very strange. I know I'm not crazy, and I know what I heard. I will probably never open my window ever again, since I don't want to find out who or what was making those sounds, and I definitely do not want them to come back. Does anyone know what this could be? I asked my neighbors if they heard, and only 1 out of 4 claimed they did. We both don't know what it was. Don't sleep with a mirror facing your bed. My grandmother once told me this when I was a kid. She was a batty old widow at that time, and I remember a 12-year-old me rolling my eyes at her superstitions. It was this exact memory that I distinctly remembered as I stared at the dilapidated old mirror in my new apartment bedroom. The mirror had a black wooden frame, which was cracked in a few places from age. The glass itself had several blemishes and dark spots, again from age. I glanced over my shoulder and saw where the moving company had placed my bed, directly in front of the mirror. To be fair, the bedroom was tiny. This was New York City after all, so there wasn't anywhere else to put the bed except right in front of the mirror. The mirror was the only thing left in the apartment when I moved in. I took a step back and glanced around my new apartment. While admittedly small, it was still much larger than most people could afford, and I'd gotten it for a hell of a deal. I glanced back into the mirror and stared at myself. At the same time, the nagging suspicion that had shadowed my mind since I'd seen the listing crept back to the surface of my brain. Maybe my sister had been right. Maybe there was a reason the price had been so low. My phone vibrated, rousing me from my thoughts. It was the group message from my new buddies. We were doing a bar crawl. leaving the unpacking for tomorrow. I jumped in the shower and then grabbed some clothes from a suitcase before heading out. Around 2 a.m., me and Big Vice stumbled to my apartment. Vic was almost 7 feet tall and had played college ball for Unk before he shredded his knees and had to finish his career at NU. I'd watched him drink nearly a whole bottle of Jack tonight, and he was sloshed. He was leaning all over me, nearly crushing me because of his size. But I managed to get him to my sofa, and he passed out. His legs were hanging off the edge as he began to snore. I chuckled, then headed to my bedroom, kicking off my shoes and pants and climbing in. Before closing my eyes, I saw my dark reflection in the mirror. The whites of my eyes shone back at me in the darkness. My drunken sleep was restless, and I felt like I was spinning all night. Finally, I felt the sun touch my eyelids. At the same time, my alarm for 9 went off. I opened my eyes. The old mirror was only an inch away from my face. I was so close to it that my breath had fogged the glass, and the tip of my nose was touching the glass. I recoiled in surprise, stumbling over the bed and falling back onto it. My stomach flipped, and I gagged. I sprang back to my feet and barely made it to the toilet before vomiting. I felt a little better and shakily got to my feet. I glanced back into the bedroom and stared at the mirror. Surely I hadn't woken up looking into it. That must have been a bad dream. I stepped closer to examine it, and my heart skipped. I gaped at the mirror, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I put a shaking finger out and touched the glass, but only felt coldness. Again, I stared into the mirror at myself. What the fuck was this? My phone rang, rousing me from my stupor. I tore myself away from the mirror and grabbed my phone off my nightstand. It was Vic. I glanced over into the living room and saw that he was not there. He must have taken off before I woke up. "Vic?" I answered. "Hey," he replied. But his voice was soft, almost frightened. I'd never once heard Vic sound scared. It's hard to be scared of anything when you're a giant. "Yeah," he continued. "Sorry, I split so early. Thanks for giving me a place to crash. What was the hurry?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. He muttered. "Nothing. Just, felt like getting the day started." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, "What are you doing for dinner?" Vic asked. "Dinner?" I asked jokingly. "What about lunch?" There was another moment of silence. "Mike, it's 5 o'clock. Everything became very quiet, except for the ringing in my ears. I pulled the phone away from my face and looked at the time. Vic was right. I turned slowly to the bedroom, feeling my heart thumping in my chest. The bedroom window showed a darkening sky. I looked at the old mirror. The fog was gone. I'd been staring at the mirror for 8 hours. I raised the phone back to my lips. I gotta go. I tossed the phone and approached the mirror, doing my best not to look at it. But it was impossible. I couldn't help but sneak a peek. No. I tore my gaze away and then seized the sheets off my bed. I threw them over the mirror, then grabbed the frame to pull it off the wall. It didn't budge. I tried to lift it. Perhaps it was on a nail, but no, nothing. I pulled the bedsheet up just enough to look at the edge of the frame. It was firmly pressed against the wall. There was no gap. I searched all along the edge and confirmed this observation. Perhaps it was glued on, or bolted somehow. I stepped back, my mind racing. I needed information. I quickly cleaned up, then left the apartment and headed for the leasing office. I arrived, but groaned. They were closed on Sunday. I started to turn around, but then I saw the mailroom. An idea sprung to mind. Previous tenants often had some mail go to them, even after they changed addresses, due to the time it took them to change it. I pulled out my apartment keys and found the mailbox key. I went to my numbered box and opened it. Sure enough, I found some mail. It was all junk, except there was a thick envelope with a company name emblazoned on it. I shrugged and opened it. Inside was a stack of fresh business cards. Jackpot. I called the cell phone number. "This is Rick," he answered in a professional business tone. "Rick, sorry for the call. I just moved into your old apartment and needed to ask you about the mirror." Rick hung up. Swearing, I redialed. No answer. I dialed again. It went straight to voicemail. He'd blocked me. Son of a bitch. I looked around the leasing office and found a public phone. I grabbed it and dialed his number again. He answered. "Don't hang up on me. I need answers. Please," I begged him. For a second, I heard nothing. Then, "Did you sleep in front of it?" His voice, softer than a whisper, asked. My stomach dropped, and I felt my hands start to go numb. "Yes," I breathed. There was another agonizingly long silence. Finally, I heard him breathe. "Break your lease and get the fuck out of there. Not one more night." And then he hung up. I redialed, but it went to voicemail. He'd blocked me again. I dropped the phone and sat back, stunned. I couldn't break my lease. I had a couple $100 to my name and over 80 grand of debt, courtesy of Naifaku. I was 22, fresh out of college, and I'm living paycheck to paycheck right now. That's why I took this apartment in the first place, because it was so cheap. My mind spun all evening as I tried to think of a solution, until at last I found myself at 11 p.m., standing in my bedroom. I'd barely touched my pizza, preferring to hit the bottle for sustenance and nerve calming. I glanced at the old mirror, still covered by the bedsheets. My hands balled into fists. Fuck this thing. I reached into one of the unpacked boxes where a toolkit was. I withdrew a hammer and then stood in front of the mirror. Fuck you. I slammed the hammer into the covered mirror, feeling the satisfying shatter of the delicate glass. I grinned and then hit it again and again and again and again. I smashed it into pieces until the whole damn frame split apart and fell off the wall, leaving a dark stain behind. Relieved and victorious, I threw the hammer into the wreckage and then headed to the shower to clean off. After emerging, I walked to the sofa in the living room, content to clean up the mess after work tomorrow. I pulled a blanket over me, and grateful sleep took me in an instant. I awoke, staring at the ceiling. It was cold. My blanket must have fallen off. No, I was on the bare mattress in the bedroom. I took a long, slow, shuddering breath, then looked forward. The old mirror, completely undamaged, reflected me as I lay spread-eagled on the mattress. In the reflection of the mirror, hanging above me on the ceiling, was a man. He was pitch black, blacker than tar, like he was made entirely of shadow. And he was staring down at me. I looked back up at the ceiling. It was bare. I looked back at the mirror. The man was now staring at me. The whites of his eyes shone in the darkness. I was trapped in his stare. I don't know for how long. Then he dropped on me. I screamed and jumped off the mattress. Howling in horror, I tore through the apartment, crashing into the door and barreling out onto the street. With no other options, I went to my sister's apartment. It took me 2 hours since I had to go on foot because my phone, wallet, and keys were still in the apartment. I knocked on her door for 5 minutes before she finally woke up and answered. I told her a lie, which she knew was fake, but she didn't press and let me in. She led me to her guest bedroom before heading back to bed herself. I went straight to the bathroom, not even daring to look at the bathroom mirror, and took a long, warm, calming shower. With that done, I stepped out, shut the bathroom door, and climbed into the guest bed. I laid my head on the pillow and sighed, utterly exhausted. I'd call in sick at work tomorrow, and then try to figure out the apartment situation. Vic was in law school. Maybe he could help me break my lease without having to pay money. I didn't have. As I reached down to pull the covers up to my chin, I happened to glance forward. The old mirror was in front of me on the wall. My daughter Kennedy is 13 years old, but she thinks like a wise grandma. She never causes any trouble and knows what's best for herself. She never needed help with anything and only relied on herself. It started to get really bad when she turned 10. Me and my wife Lauren thought it was cute when she wanted to do everything on her own, but it got out of hand and she would totally break down if we tried to help her. She never asked us for any help with school, and she never asked my wife for advice for boys like most preteens would. We got so worried when she stopped eating and lost 10 pounds because of how focused she was on school. Kennedy was our first kid at the time, so we had to ask around about how we could help her. The local parents had some basic ideas, like going on a vacation or having a family game night every Friday. Me and my wife had already thought of these, but they never worked out in the end. Kennedy always found a way to think of school and work. We kept on asking the parents when one couple said, "Take her on a camping trip." Me and Lauren really thought about this idea. It would be a secluded cabin by a nice lake, and it would be a perfect opportunity to have some family time without anything in our way. Little did we know that would be the worst mistake of our lives. So on June 28, 2013 at 9:45 a.m., we left for the cabin. Lauren's parents used to camp all the time before they died, so they left the cabin for her. Lorraine was excited because she hadn't been there since she was 17. I remember the whole way there. It's hard to forget a day like that. The weather was great. The sky was blue, and the wind was just right. We had a little party in the car. But of course, Kennedy didn't want to join in. When we got closer to the cabin, the smooth road became gravel. When we got there, Kennedy immediately got out of the car and ran down to the lake. It was weird, because Kennedy hated lakes because they were infested with bacteria and diseases. Me and Lauren unpacked the car while Kennedy sat down in front of the lake. "This is going a lot better than we planned," Lauren said, placing her suitcase in the cabin. I know. I think this was a good idea." I said this as I was placing the last of the bags down. Lauren brought her stuff upstairs to our room while I took a look around. I've never been to this cabin before, so all of this was new to me. After an hour or two, Kennedy still hadn't come inside. Me and Lauren didn't bother to bring her in before because she looked like she really liked the outside. But it was getting dark, so I went outside while Lauren was cooking some hamburgers. "Kennedy," I yelled a little. "Dinner's almost ready, so come back inside." No answer. "Kennedy," I yelled a little louder than last time. "Boo!" Kennedy comes up from behind me and scares the living shite out of me. Oh my gosh. Kennedy, don't scare me like that. I'm holding my heart through my shirt. Kennedy grins and walks inside. Kennedy was way more mature than this, but I brushed it off because maybe she felt more at ease out here. We had our hamburgers and went upstairs to go to sleep. Kennedy was happier and more energetic, which is the total opposite of when she is at home. At home, Kennedy is sad, gloomy, and so tired. When Lauren finished brushing her teeth, I told her what happened when I was calling in Kennedy from outside, and of course she just said it was because of the change of scenery. But I had a bad feeling in my gut, but I was too tired to think much of it, so I fell asleep. I was first up, so I decided to make breakfast for a change. I finished cooking some pancakes and went upstairs to wake up the girls. I went into mine and Lauren's room, and she was sleeping so peacefully that I gently shook her to wake her up. "Rise and shine. Breakfast is ready." Lauren smiled a bit and got up. I was on my way to Kennedy's room when a wave of a rotten stench took over. I almost threw up on the spot, but I had to swallow it back. I slowly walked up to Kennedy's door and opened it. Her window was open, and there was a dead deer lying on its side beside her bed. The deer was in shreds. The inside was on the outside. Its eyeballs were nowhere to be seen, and there were bugs all inside and out. I looked around, and Kennedy was gone. I yelled for Lauren, telling her that Kennedy was missing. Lauren ran to Kennedy's room and held back a mouthful of vomit. She ran back to our room and quickly called 911. It took them 25 minutes to get to the cabin because we were literally in the middle of nowhere. They searched around the cabin and a little in the woods, but found nothing but a piece of clothing that Kennedy had on. We had to leave our things back at the cabin so that the detectives could do a search. Me and Lauren got asked questions like, "What were you doing when she went missing?" And stuff like, did she act differently beforehand? You know, like the ones on TV. We soon got released and went back home. Lauren fell ill a couple days after the disappearance, so I had to take more days off of work to take care of her. Lauren didn't eat and had many nightmares about Kennedy and the dead deer in her room. I got her into therapy 2 weeks after Kennedy went missing. I was worried about Lauren and the things she could do to herself. Lauren was progressively getting better after every session, so she started eating more as a result. We were having chicken Alfredo that night when we got a knock on the door. It was a soft knock that could have been mistaken for the wind. At first, that's what we thought, so we continued eating until the soft knock turned into a bang. We both jumped and stared at the door for a good minute. Then I got up to check the door. I opened the door slowly, and then I saw her. Kennedy standing on the front steps. She smelled disgusting and looked like she'd been to hell and back. I quickly let her inside, and Lauren ran to her while sobbing on Kennedy's shoulder and squeezing her in a tight hug. I quickly called the ambulance and gave her a tight hug, despite her smelling like a dead animal. When we got to the hospital, there were doctors outside already waiting for her with a stretcher. Kennedy was rushed inside while I and Lauren waited in the waiting room. It took about 25 minutes before a nurse came out and let us into her room. She didn't say anything while we were there. Even when the police came in and questioned her, she was silent. She was allowed out the next day because her cuts weren't that bad. On the way home, I took a quick peek at the rearview mirror to check up on Kennedy and found her already looking at me. No emotion in her eyes. I got startled and quickly looked away. When we got home, she immediately went up to her room and slammed the door so loudly that it made me jump. Me and Lauren were worried when she didn't come down for dinner. It was finally time for bed when I heard a thump come from her room. Me and Lauren rushed to her room and were shocked by what we saw. I don't have enough time to finish because of personal reasons. Please let me know if you would like to know more about this. I left off where me and Lauren heard a thump coming from Kennedy's room. We rushed to her room, and that's when we saw it. A tall, dark man holding a dead deer over his shoulder. I quickly turned around looking for the light switch, and when I looked back, the man was gone. The only thing left was the deer, which looked identical to the deer at the cabin. Kennedy was wide awake, with the same cold expression on her face. I doubted for a bit that she saw anything because of her reaction, but Lauren swore she saw Kennedy awake during everything. She also said she saw a small smirk on her face. Of course, I didn't believe her, because she could have easily just seen it wrong, and it was pretty dark. So I didn't pay attention to that. I ran up to Kennedy, but she didn't even look at me. She was staring at the deer with the slightest bit of excitement in her eyes. I told Lauren to call the police and fill them in on what we saw while I took Kennedy outside. The house reeked of dead animals, and I couldn't handle it, even though I've smelled the stench multiple times. It's just something you just can't get used to. Kennedy fell asleep on my shoulder while waiting for the police to arrive, and they did a deep search in the house, but came up with nothing. Me and Lauren packed up some things for us and Kennedy and went to a hotel for the night. It would take a while for that smell to leave the house. When we got there, Kennedy was still passed out, so I had to do 2 trips. After dropping Kennedy off in our hotel room, I went back down to get the leftovers in the car. I could see my car from inside the hotel, and then I saw him again. The same tall black figure that was in Kennedy's room the same night. I rubbed my eyes, thinking that I must have been seeing things because of how exhausted I was. But he was still there, right beside my car, looking at me. I felt shivers down my spine and a bad feeling in my gut. I should have never walked up to that man, but I was too stubborn to let him walk free. I stomped outside and faced him. Sort of. This man was a lot taller than I thought, and I'm a pretty tall man myself. I'm around 61, but this man was way taller than me. You could have mistaken him for a slender man if he wasn't so dark and didn't look so human. I looked up at him, and he slowly looked down. "Who are you?" I yelled at him with frustration in my voice. "Why won't you leave my kid alone?" I was huffing at this point, and then he moved. He bent down a little bit, and he started to put his hand over my face. I tried too hard to get out of his grip, but nothing worked, and then I passed out. I woke up in the hotel room with Lauren sleeping on the other end of the bed. I quickly got up, looking around frantically, expecting to see the man again, but he was gone. Lauren woke up because of how hard I was breathing and comforted me, telling me it was just a bad dream, but I swear it wasn't. Ever since that day, I swear I've been seeing this man everywhere I go. I've seen him at work, at the end of my bed, around the corners of my house, and even when I'm out in public. But the place I see him most is in Kennedy's room, and I don't know if I'm crazy or not, but I swear she can see him too. Whenever I see this man somewhat close to her, she's automatically in a great mood. She gets talkative. She hangs out with us. She even cooks us dinner once in a while. But when this man leaves, she almost immediately loses all motivation to continue what she was doing. When he's not around, she gets violent, and I don't mean like saying mean things. I mean like full, on punching me or slapping Lauren for no particular reason. Lauren can't bring herself to be hard on Kennedy since the incident, but I'm as hard on her as I was before. I ground her and take her phone. Nothing big. One night, the man was around, so Kennedy was all happy and cooking us dinner. Me and Lauren were watching a show. But when I looked back, the man was crouched down to Kennedy's height, whispering something in her ear. Kennedy chuckled a bit and then walked away, but the man didn't follow her. I jumped up off the couch, scaring Lauren, and ran over to him. "Leave my family alone," I said, making sure to keep my voice down. "Don't worry, Lauren." The man laughs a wicked, weird laugh. It hurt my ears so much I had to cover them with my hands. Kennedy came back with something in her hand. A dead rat. She looked surprised when she saw me. Quickly hiding the rat behind her back, I looked back at the man, but he was gone, disappearing out of thin air. Lauren was sitting on the couch, looking at us in confusion. I grabbed Kennedy's hand and showed the dead rat to Lauren. "We need to call someone about this," I say, no hesitation in my voice whatsoever. Lauren looked disgusted and almost threw up. I got Kennedy to throw the rat outside and then go upstairs to pack her stuff. I didn't know what I was going to do at that moment, but I knew I didn't want this thing in my house anymore. It may seem mean of me to call my daughter a thing, but if you were in my position, then you would say it too. Kennedy finished packing and we got into the car. We drove around for 45 minutes so that I could find out what to do with her, and then I thought of it. The perfect place for someone like her would be a mental hospital or something. I didn't know a lot about mental illnesses, but I was sure that Kennedy had one. We did everything we needed to and left her there. A big weight lifted off my back after we got in the car. I felt a little guilty for doing that, but what else could I have done? It was my first time dealing with something like that, and no one would understand if I told them. That night, I had the worst nightmare about Kennedy and the man. I can't bring myself to say it, but it still disgusts me to this day. I swear I've been seeing Kennedy in her room, just standing there, but when I rub my eyes, she's gone. I can't explain the things I'm seeing to anybody, but I'm sure you guys will understand.